Jonathan Carter never dreamed that a single decision, buying an abandoned house on a remote edge of town, would upend his carefully curated life. Standing before its broken windows and weathered walls, he had no inkling of the secrets he was about to uncover. After all, he was a millionaire entrepreneur, not a ghost hunter or an archaeologist of personal tragedies. Yet something beckoned him, urging him beyond the rusted gate. Whispers of a lost legacy, tangled with rumors of a hidden fortune, ignited his imagination. If only he knew how this crumbling mansion's past would reveal his own future and forever alter his soul. Jonathan Carter's life seemed perfect by every external measure. Tall, debonair, and just crossing into his early 40s, he was the kind of man who wore success like a tailored suit. His startup in Redwood Falls, a small but bustling city in Minnesota, had catapulted him to millionaire status in fewer than 10 years. Real estate investments, stocks, and a series of wise technology ventures had compounded his fortune. He kept a penthouse apartment overlooking the city's modest skyline and maintained memberships at exclusive clubs where waiters knew his drink preferences by heart. People in Redwood Falls whispered about him, some admiring, some envious. Yet wealth often comes with invisible burdens, and Jonathan's had grown heavier each year. His parents had passed away in a tragic car accident when he was in his early 20s, leaving him a modest inheritance that he had leveraged shrewdly. He'd always believed that if he built an empire from that nest egg, he would find fulfillment. Money, property, achievements, he devoured them all. But something was missing, a piece of him that never felt complete. When a local real estate agent, Harriet Brandt, informed him of a foreclosed and abandoned estate on the outskirts of Redwood Falls, Jonathan jumped at the chance to explore it. Despite the grandeur of his penthouse, there was something romantic about owning a classic old mansion, especially one rumored to have secrets sealed within its dusty corridors. The property, known in local lore as Willow Ridge House, loomed at the end of a dirt road flanked by towering oaks. Stories about the place abounded, echoes of a once prominent family, possibly a tragedy that ended their lineage. Talk of underground tunnels, lost diaries, even ghosts, typical small-town legends. Harriet was reluctant to show the property at first. "It's been left to rot for decades," she warned over the phone. Multiple owners tried to fix it up or flip it, but something always went wrong. Lawsuits, mysterious accidents, even a fire in the 1980s that gutted part of the attic. "I want you to be sure about this, Jonathan." "I'm certain," Jonathan replied coolly, a sense of uncharacteristic excitement surging in him. "Let's set a time to meet there." They arrived on a chilly Thursday morning. The sky was a canvas of thick grey clouds, and the wind hissed through the trees. The gates, tall iron bars, twisted and rusted, stood open as if inviting them to an otherworldly realm. The driveway was choked with weeds, and the once stately grounds were now an overgrown wilderness. At the center stood the mansion, 3 stories of peeling paint, broken windows, and a collapsing porch. Yet Jonathan saw something else entirely. He saw potential. He saw a story waiting to be discovered. The minute he set foot on the porch, the old boards groaned like restless spirits. Harriet watched him carefully, expecting him to turn back. But he stepped forward, pushing the door open. It yielded with a shriek. Inside, dust motes danced in the weak sunlight, and a stale odor of neglect draped every room. Jonathan walked through the foyer, his footsteps echoing. A tarnished chandelier hung overhead, crystals missing. A grand staircase led to the second floor, banisters chipped and riddled with cobwebs. Old framed paintings had been removed from the walls long ago, leaving faint rectangular outlines on the peeling wallpaper. Doors opened into cavernous spaces, a drawing room, a library with warped shelves, a dining room that had once seated a dozen guests. Though Harriet hovered nervously, Jonathan felt drawn to each creaking floorboard and hidden corner. "I'll take it," he said, his voice echoing in the emptiness. "I want to restore it." Harriet's eyebrows shot up. "You're not even going to think about it for a day or two." Jonathan shook his head. "I'll handle any repairs. This place, I don't know, it speaks to me." And so, with a few swift strokes of a pen, Willow Ridge House and every secret it harbored became his. Jonathan wasted no time. Within a week, he had hired a team of contractors led by a man named Bruce Bull Wallace, an ex-Marine whose reputation for high-quality restorations stretched across the region. Bull wasn't cheap, but Jonathan insisted on the best. The plan was straightforward: repair the roof, redo the plumbing and electrical wiring, then methodically restore each room to some semblance of its original grandeur while updating it for modern comfort. He also brought in an interior historian, Dr. Harriet Barnes, coincidentally sharing the first name of his real estate agent, though no relation, who specialized in Victorian-era architecture. She was in her late 50s, slender, with salt and pepper hair pinned into a bun. She wore a serious expression and large glasses that seemed to magnify her inquisitive eyes. She arrived with an armful of historical references about Redwood Falls' oldest families. Most records show that Willow Ridge House once belonged to the Kensington family. Dr. Barnes told Jonathan on her first day. They were quite prominent in local business, ran a printing press, and had large land holdings until a scandal in the late 1920s. After that, they faded into obscurity. There's a rumor that the last resident, Lily Kensington, disappeared after a tragedy, but official records are sparse. This house is a goldmine for historians. If we can find any original documents or diaries, I'd be thrilled to comb through every nook and cranny. Jonathan gave her free rein, excited to unearth Willow Ridge's story. Meanwhile, Bull and his crew attacked the grime, rot, and structural damage with sledgehammers and skillful hands. It was during the first week that they made a startling discovery in the cellar. Late one afternoon, Jonathan received a call from Bull. "Sir, you better get down to the cellar. We found something unusual." Jonathan dropped everything and drove out to Willow Ridge House. Bull stood outside the cellar door, a flashlight in hand, the workers silent behind him. A musty smell enveloped them as they descended the creaking steps. The cellar itself was spacious but looked mostly empty, except for some rotted crates and old furniture. But in a far corner, behind piles of debris, the men had uncovered a hidden panel in the stone wall. In the beam of Bull's flashlight, they saw that the stones were arranged to form a disguised doorway. With careful effort, the crew pried it open, revealing a small, sealed chamber. Inside, they found a dusty wooden trunk and a battered leather-bound book resting atop it. The trunk had an ornate metal latch, but time and rust had eaten away its strength. Bull cracked it open without much resistance. The entire crew held their breath. Inside lay old letters, legal documents, and a few personal belongings, a locket, some old photographs, and what appeared to be a signet ring etched with the letter K. Jonathan picked up the ring, brushed the grime away, and immediately recognized the fine craftsmanship. Beneath it, he saw a stack of envelopes tied together with string. The letters were addressed to Lily Kensington at Willow Ridge House, postmarked from the early 1920s. "This is incredible," Jonathan whispered. Excited, "Bull, do you see this? We have a real piece of history here." Bull shrugged. "Spooky is what it is, boss. Who hides a trunk behind a stone wall?" Jonathan only smiled. Something inside him stirred curiosity, but also something deeper, a sense of connection to a distant past. "All right, let's seal this area for now," Jonathan told the crew. "We'll bring in Dr. Barnes to examine these items. I want to be careful and preserve everything properly." That night, Jonathan couldn't sleep. He kept imagining the lives once lived in Willow Ridge, as if the house itself had a soul. Why had Lily Kensington hidden a trunk behind a wall? Who sent her these letters? Did she ever read them? And what about the ring? The next morning, Dr. Barnes arrived earlier than usual, her eyes glowing with excitement when she saw the trunk and its contents. She wore gloves to gently handle each document, meticulously cataloguing every letter, photograph, and clipping. Jonathan hovered nearby, equally enthralled. "This ring with the K, Doctor," Barnes murmured, "definitely a family heirloom. And these letters, let's see." She opened the first envelope, scanning the faded ink. My goodness. It's from someone named Michael Farnsworth, apparently Lily's fiancé, or perhaps a beau of some kind. Jonathan leaned closer. "What does it say, Doctor?" Barnes cleared her throat and began reading aloud, paraphrasing the more difficult parts. "My beloved Lily, not a day passes that I do not yearn for your voice, your laughter. The arrangement with your father stands in the way of our future, but I beg of you, do not lose hope. I will find a way to mend our rift. One day, Willow Ridge shall ring with joyful news. Until then, I remain devoted to you, yours in faith." Michael Jonathan exhaled, feeling a peculiar sense of heartbreak for a woman who had been dead for decades. Star-crossed lovers. Must be, Doctor. Barnes nodded. The father must have opposed Lily's relationship with Michael Farnsworth for some reason. Perhaps Farnsworth wasn't from the right family or had financial problems. By the 1920s, the Kensingtons were rumored to be losing money due to the Great Depression, but it could have been about social status. More letters revealed that Lily Kensington had grown estranged from her domineering father, Edgar Kensington, after her mother's death. She'd planned to run away with Michael Farnsworth, yet something or someone had stopped her. In the trunk, near the bottom, they found a single page torn from a diary, dated May 16, 1924. Jonathan lifted it with trembling hands and read the elegant script. "I cannot endure father's wrath any longer. Michael urges me to flee, but I am torn. Father is ill, and the family name rests upon my shoulders. How can I abandon him, even if he is cruel? Each step forward is shadowed by dread. If only there were some sign to guide me." The final lines of the diary page were smudged, as if tears had fallen onto the ink. Jonathan felt a pang in his chest. How might Lily's life have unfolded under such harsh choices? "This is more than a renovation, Dr. Barnes," he whispered. "This is a story that deserves to be told. I want to know what happened to Lily Kensington." She nodded. "We may find more clues in the house. There's a rumor she had a child, but the records are conflicting." "Let's keep searching," Jonathan said resolutely. Over the following weeks, the crew made substantial progress. The damaged roof was replaced, the structure reinforced, and fresh wiring threaded through the walls. But strange occurrences began plaguing the site. Tools disappeared, only to resurface in odd places. Lights flickered, even though the electrical system was newly installed. Workers reported hearing footsteps in empty rooms. A few of the men, superstitious by nature, whispered that the house was haunted. Bull Wallace maintained a fearless front, dismissing talk of ghosts as nonsense. But Jonathan couldn't help feeling uneasy. Late one evening, he insisted on spending the night in one of the recently refurbished bedrooms. If the house had secrets, perhaps immersing himself there alone would bring answers, or, at least, quell his curiosity. The night was still, with only the distant hoot of an owl. Around midnight, Jonathan jolted awake. Someone or something was crying. It was faint, a soft sobbing that seemed to echo through the hallway. He jumped out of bed, heart pounding. Wearing only a T-shirt and sweatpants, he crept down the corridor, flashlight in hand. The noise seemed to come from a closed door at the far end, a door that led to the attic stairwell, an area still under repair. When he turned the handle, the door resisted, as if locked from the other side. Suddenly, the crying ceased, replaced by a chilling silence. He pressed his ear against the door, muscles tense. Nothing. With a shaky breath, he returned to his bedroom, questioning his own sanity. Perhaps he'd imagined it. Perhaps it was the wind. Yet, the next morning, he found footprints in the dust by the attic stairs, small footprints, as if left by a woman's or child's shoe. But the workers claimed no one had gone up there. Jonathan kept his fears to himself, not wanting to fuel rumors. Dr. Barnes continued her research, scouring newspaper archives and public records in Redwood Falls. One afternoon, she arrived with a file of shocking information. Sitting down with Jonathan in what had once been the manor's grand library, she began to recount what she'd discovered. From the letters and the diary page, we already suspect Lily was in love with Michael Farnsworth. But official documents show that Lily Kensington was briefly married in 1925, not to Michael Farnsworth, but to a man named Charles Gilbert. The marriage certificate is on file. Even more interesting, the local courthouse records a child born the following year, a daughter named Beatrice Gilbert. Jonathan's eyes widened. Then Lily did have a child. Yes, Doctor, Barnes confirmed. But here's where it gets really dark. Lily's father, Edgar, apparently forced her into marrying Charles Gilbert to pay off family debts. Charles was much older, rumored to be controlling, and the union was unhappy from the start. Michael Farnsworth disappeared from Redwood Falls around that time. Some suggest Edgar had him threatened or forced out of town. Then there's a record stating Lily was hospitalized for nervous exhaustion. Jonathan winced. Poor woman, Dr. Barnes nodded. Even more tragic, we can't find a death certificate for Lily, but the rumor is she died under mysterious circumstances. The property was foreclosed in 1929. Charles Gilbert vanished as well. The daughter, Beatrice, would have been around 3. No further trace of her. A heavy silence fell. Jonathan stared at the dust-laden library shelves, imagining Lily wandering these very rooms, tormented by heartbreak and duty. He felt a pang that he recognized as empathy and also guilt. Guilt that he was the one benefiting from this property now, while Lily's fate and her daughter's fate remained unknown. This house is more than just a piece of real estate, Jonathan said, meeting Dr. Barnes's eyes. I want to honor its history. Maybe there's a living descendant of Lily or her daughter. Dr. Barnes offered a weak smile. That's a possibility. If we could locate the lineage, you might have a legal or ethical decision to make. Jonathan exhaled. All right, let's proceed. Whatever we uncover, I'll handle it responsibly. As word spread that Jonathan Carter was restoring Willow Ridge House, an old rival emerged from Redwood Falls business circles. Christopher Mills, a cunning real estate mogul with a penchant for flipping historic properties into luxury hotels or shopping complexes. Mills, short and sharp-eyed, had approached Harriet Brandt about the property weeks before Jonathan, but Harriet had never returned his calls because she deemed him an unscrupulous developer. Now, Mills saw Jonathan's project as a threat and a potential opportunity. One afternoon, as Jonathan inspected new flooring in the main hall, Mills drove up unannounced in a sleek black sedan. He strutted across the porch, not bothering to knock. Jonathan Carter, Mills said with a thin smile. Renovating an old ghost house, I see. Must be quite the cost sink. Jonathan forced a polite grin. Mills, surprised you'd brave the weeds to get here. Is there something you need? Mills surveyed the chipped banisters, the scaffolding along the walls, the half-finished restoration. I've got an offer for you. Save yourself the trouble. Sell Willow Ridge House to me. I'll pay top dollar. That's kind, but I'm not interested in selling. Mills's smile tightened. No offense, but restoring a property like this is a money pit. You and I both know you didn't get rich by throwing cash into nostalgia. Why not let me handle the heavy lifting? You can walk away with a profit. Jonathan's voice sharpened. "I'm doing more than just flipping an old house, Mills. This place has a story. I'm not going to demolish it for a strip mall or some tacky resort. And for the record, I've never done business just for a quick buck. Willow Ridge House deserves better." Mills spread his hands, feigning humility. "Suit yourself, but if you change your mind, my offer stands. Don't let sentimentality cloud your judgment, Carter. Riches come and go, but so do these derelict money pits." Without waiting for a response, Mills turned on his heel and left. Jonathan watched him depart, anger twisting his gut. He vowed to protect Willow Ridge from opportunists like Christopher Mills, no matter the cost. That evening, as dusk settled over the estate, Jonathan strolled through the overgrown garden. He needed space to think. His footsteps crunched along the broken stone path, and the wind rustled the tall grass. The remains of a grand fountain, chipped and mossy, crouched in the center. He paused, imagining the Kensingtons hosting garden parties under strings of lanterns. Suddenly, he sensed a presence. Turning around, he found an elderly woman standing behind him. She wore a simple grey coat, her silver hair neatly pinned. There was a quiet dignity about her, as though she belonged to another era. "Hello," Jonathan said softly. "I didn't hear you come up." She offered a polite smile. "Apologies if I startled you. I've walked past this house many times, but I never dared approach. People say it's haunted, you know." Jonathan's curiosity piqued. "It might be, but I'm hoping to bring it back to life. I'm Jonathan Carter, the new owner." She nodded. "I'm Rachel Patterson. My grandmother once worked here as a maid before the Kensington family lost it. She'd speak of the place sometimes, always with sorrow. She said Willow Ridge was cursed by heartbreak." Jonathan's heart thumped. "Did your grandmother ever mention Lily Kensington or her daughter?" Rachel's eyes glistened. "She mentioned a baby, yes, a little girl named Beatrice. But after Lily's father died, Mr. Charles Gilbert took over, and he was cruel. My grandmother left soon after. She never learned what became of Lily and her child." Jonathan sighed. "The more I learn, the more questions arise. I'm trying to piece it all together. Dr. Barnes, an historian, thinks Lily might have been forced into that marriage, and that she died young." Rachel nodded sadly. "Likely so. My grandmother always said Lily was a lovely young lady with a warm heart, but sorrow clung to her." After a pause, Rachel gently touched Jonathan's arm. "I'm glad you're restoring this place. I don't believe the spirits are angry. They're just lost. If you need any old memories or second-hand stories, I'll share what I can." "Thank you," Jonathan said earnestly. "I might take you up on that." Rachel left him in the garden as dusk deepened. Jonathan felt more than ever that he was on a path set before him by forces unknown. Intrigued by the footsteps he had found near the attic door, Jonathan insisted that the renovation crew finally tackle the attic. They cleared away charred debris from the 1980s fire, replaced rotted beams, and installed new windows. One morning, as Dr. Barnes sorted through furniture scraps, she discovered a tiny door tucked behind an antique armoire. It led to a small crawl space in the eaves. There, in the dust and cobwebs, Jonathan found an old trunk similar to the one in the cellar, but smaller. He pried it open, heart pounding. Inside was a single object, a music box carved with intricate floral patterns. He lifted it, careful not to damage its delicate mechanisms. When he turned the crank, the music box played a haunting lullaby, the notes rising and falling in a melancholic melody. Inside the lid was a mirror, cracked, but still reflecting light. Scattered among the box's plush interior were a few strands of auburn hair tied with a ribbon. Jonathan felt a shiver at the intimacy of this relic. Dr. Barnes hovered at his side. A lullaby. Perhaps it was for the child, Beatrice, or maybe it belonged to Lily when she was young. This is a deeply personal item. Jonathan closed the music box gently. It's as if they left behind a piece of their sorrow. I can almost feel it. Over the next few days, Dr. Barnes restored the music box as best she could. Jonathan asked her to place it in a protective display case in the library next to the other Kensington artifacts. He hoped that, in some small way, preserving these objects would honor the family's memory. Complications soon arose. Dr. Barnes's research, along with Harriet Brandt's inquiries, revealed that, in theory, if a direct Kensington or Gilbert descendant existed, they might have a claim on Willow Ridge House. Although the property had passed through banks, foreclosures, and multiple owners over nearly a century, certain inheritance laws could complicate Jonathan's ownership, especially if Lily's lineage could prove they had never relinquished legal rights. Jonathan was torn. He had poured considerable resources into restoring Willow Ridge, not to mention an emotional investment. The idea that someone might appear out of nowhere and stake a claim both worried and excited him. He wanted what was just, but he also felt a possessive bond to the house. One day, Harriet Brandt arranged a meeting with Michael Farnsworth III, a genealogist from Chicago, who claimed a distant connection to Redwood Falls. Harriet believed he might be related to the Michael Farnsworth who once courted Lily. Eager to learn more, Jonathan invited him to the estate. Michael Farnsworth III was in his 60s, with neat grey hair and an old-world charm. Over tea, in the partially renovated drawing room, he listened intently to Jonathan's account. "My grandfather, Michael Farnsworth Sr., told me stories of Redwood Falls and a girl he loved who was forced away from him," Farnsworth began, eyes distant with memory. He lived in Chicago afterward, married, had children, but he never forgot Lily Kensington. Before he died, he made us promise to learn the truth about her, if we ever had the chance. "That's why I'm here." Jonathan's chest tightened. "Do you have any evidence that your grandfather's Lily is the same? Lily we've discovered lived and possibly died here." Farnsworth III pulled out a faded photograph. In it, a young man with the same sharp features as Farnsworth sat next to a girl with gentle eyes. On the back, in neat script, was written, "Michael and Lily, 1923, Redwood Falls." Dr. Barnes gasped. "That's definitely Lily Kensington. The family portrait we uncovered matches her face exactly." Silence settled over them, thick with ghosts from the past. Farnsworth III swallowed hard. "Do we know how she died?" Jonathan shook his head slowly. "We only have rumors. Some say it was an accident or an illness, or that Charles Gilbert was abusive. We haven't found her death certificate." Farnsworth III closed his eyes. Grandfather never forgave himself for leaving her behind. He said Edgar Kensington threatened to ruin his life if he didn't break it off. For Lily's sake, he left, hoping one day to return. By the time he did, the mansion was abandoned. Jonathan's throat felt tight. "I'm sorry," he said, though he knew no apology could right the wrongs done a century ago. As the renovation continued, Jonathan experienced a gnawing sense of unfinished business. Each piece of Lily's story weighed heavily on his heart. He had flashes of dreams at night, visions of Lily wandering the halls, whispering for her child, or sometimes of a little girl crying in a locked room. He would wake drenched in sweat, longing to know how their story ended. He wasn't the only one unsettled. Workers complained of a presence in the attic, and one man quit outright, muttering about hearing a woman sob. Bull, though skeptical, admitted that more than one crew member had reported strange noises. Rumors circulated in town that Jonathan's restoration was disturbing restless spirits. At the same time, Mills continued to pressure him with offers. One morning, a letter arrived by courier, an official-sounding notice from a law firm representing Christopher Mills. The letter stated that Mills intended to challenge Jonathan's ownership on the grounds that an unresolved heir might lay claim to Willow Ridge. If that heir could not be found, Mills suggested the property might revert to Redwood Falls for back taxes, which Mills was prepared to pay. Jonathan seethed. He'd paid Harriet to ensure the title was clean, but Mills clearly intended to exploit any legal technicality. Jonathan also sensed an underlying threat. If an heir did exist, Mills might try to buy them off, or entangle Jonathan in endless litigation. Feeling cornered, Jonathan contacted a prominent attorney in town, James Winston, who had handled complex estate disputes. Winston was a tall, broad-shouldered man in his 50s, with a booming voice that commanded any room. After examining the documents Jonathan provided, Winston shook his head gravely. Mills is poking around for weaknesses, that's all. He's using the possibility of a missing heir to scare you or drag this into court. But we have legitimate proof of your purchase through Harriet Brandt, along with a solid chain of title dating back decades. Even so, if a direct descendant of Lily or her daughter can present a strong case, we could see complications. Jonathan bristled. I'm not trying to cheat anyone. If Lily's descendant exists, I'm willing to discuss a fair arrangement, but until then, I won't be bullied into selling. Winston nodded. Stand firm. Keep me updated on any new discoveries that might reveal an heir. Weeks passed, the mansion's structure neared completion, and Jonathan's commitment grew stronger. Then, on a crisp autumn morning, a letter arrived for Jonathan, scrawled in shaky handwriting. It bore no return address, only a Redwood Falls postmark. Opening it, he read, Mr. Carter, I have information about Lily Kensington's child, but I fear speaking publicly. My mother was close to the family, and I may know the fate of little Beatrice. If you wish to learn more, meet me at the Redwood Falls Public Library, Tuesday at 2 p.m. I'll be in the reading nook behind the genealogical archives. A friend Jonathan's stomach flipped. Was this a prank or genuine? He decided to take the risk. The following Tuesday, he drove to the modest red brick library downtown and made his way to the reading nook behind the genealogical section. He found an elderly man with thick glasses waiting, hunched in a wooden chair, a faded cap in his hands. Mr. Carter, the man asked in a whisper. Jonathan nodded and sat beside him. Yes. Are you the one who sent the note? The man glanced around nervously. My name is Peter Morrison. My mother, God rest her soul, was a friend of Lily Kensington in her last days, and she told me some truths, sworn me to secrecy. But seeing you restore the house, hearing rumors that you care about Lily's story, well, I can't stay silent anymore. Jonathan leaned in. Please, whatever you can tell me. Peter took a shaky breath. Charles Gilbert was a monster. He beat Lily. He took their little girl, Beatrice, away for days at a time. Lily wrote letters begging for help, but no one dared cross Gilbert. Then, one night in 1929, Lily tried to flee. She packed a bag and took Beatrice, but Gilbert caught her near the garden. A scuffle ensued. Lily fell and struck her head on a stone bench. Jonathan's throat tightened. So that's how she died. Peter nodded grimly. Gilbert told everyone she had a nervous breakdown and died from an illness. My mother suspected murder, but had no proof. After Lily's death, Gilbert took Beatrice away. Some say he sold the child to distant relatives who lived in Street Paul. Others believe he institutionalized her. She would have been only 3 or 4 at the time. No one in Redwood Falls ever saw her again. My mother died believing Beatrice might still be alive somewhere. If she had children, they might be Lily's true heirs. An icy wave washed over Jonathan. Do you have any names? Any leads at all? Peter shook his head sadly. All I know is my mother heard rumor that the child was handed over to a caretaker named Margaret Hewitt in Street Paul. That's it. My mother tried writing letters, but they were never answered. She was terrified of Gilbert's threats. Jonathan clasped Peter's hand. Thank you. This means more than you know. Peter's eyes brimmed with tears. I hope you can right some of the wrongs done to Lily. She was a kind soul trapped by cruelty. After the man left, Jonathan felt both gratitude and dread. If Beatrice or her descendants were alive, tracking them down could lead to an explosive claim on Willow Ridge. Yet the moral imperative to find them gripped him. He resolved to do it no matter the risk, no matter the cost. Dr. Barnes and Harriet Brandt threw themselves into the investigation, scouring genealogical records, adoption registries, and census data from the 1930s. Jonathan hired a private investigator in Street, Paul Tracy Ellison, to comb through old hospital, orphanage, and institutional records for the name Beatrice Gilbert or Beatrice Kensington. For weeks, they found nothing definitive. The name Margaret Hewitt popped up in an old city directory from 1931, listing an address near a now defunct children's home. The name Beatrice Gilbert never appeared in official adoption records. Perhaps her name was changed. Meanwhile, Christopher Mills sensed a potential scandal looming over the property's legal status. He doubled his harassment. His law firm sent more notices. His real estate brokers spread rumors that Willow Ridge House was cursed, that Jonathan Carter was about to lose it in a lawsuit, that the banks would seize it again. Tension simmered in Redwood Falls, overshadowing Jonathan's once proud restoration. Yet Jonathan pressed on, refusing to yield. He expanded his philanthropic efforts, donating funds to local historic preservation societies, hosting small charity events on the partially renovated first floor of Willow Ridge. Through these gestures, he found an unexpected ally in Redwood Falls Mayor Lucy Hamilton, who appreciated Jonathan's genuine dedication to preserving local heritage. The mayor publicly praised his efforts, insulating him somewhat from Mills' smear campaign. Finally, in a stroke of luck, Tracy Ellison uncovered a lead, a 1932 record from Street, Paul's public school system. A Beatrice Hewitt, age 6, enrolled mid-year at Willow Creek Elementary. The birth date matched the year Lily's daughter would have been born. No father was listed. The guardian's name was Margaret Hewitt. Then, in 1934, Beatrice Hewitt disappeared from school records, possibly moved away or, more tragically, ended up in a different system. Jonathan clutched that small shred of evidence like a lifeline. If he could find what happened to Beatrice, he might uncover living relatives. The winter snows began to blanket Redwood Falls, slowing construction. Bull's crew moved indoors, painting walls and refinishing floors. Jonathan spent many late nights in the mansion, reading Lily's letters or searching for additional clues in hidden corners. The crying he'd heard months ago seemed to intensify, always near the attic. He almost grew accustomed to it, a sorrowful companion echoing through the corridors. One snowy evening, around midnight, Jonathan dared to return to the attic. Armed with a lantern and a resolute heart, he tiptoed up the narrow stairs. The renovated attic glowed with fresh drywall and newly installed light fixtures, but the sense of history lingered like a breath in the dark. He approached the small crawl space where he had found the music box. The door was ajar, though he distinctly remembered locking it to prevent workers from storing supplies inside. Heart-pounding, he entered. A draught of cold air brushed his neck. The music box sat in its old trunk, seemingly untouched. Jonathan lifted the lid, letting the lullaby play. The haunting melody filled the cramped space. Without warning, a whisper brushed against his ear, so faint he almost doubted it. "Help her." His blood turned to ice. The voice sounded like a woman's. He spun around, shining his lantern. No one was there. The hair on his arms stood up, yet he remained. "I'm trying," he whispered hoarsely, tears pricking his eyes. "I promise, I'm trying." The lullaby wound down, each note slower than the last, until silence blanketed the attic. Jonathan stayed kneeling there for a while, trembling, heart heavy, with compassion for the lingering spirit of Lily Kensington. Or perhaps it was simply the echo of his own guilt and empathy. Whichever it was, he felt a resolve as strong as steel. He would find Beatrice's fate or her descendants. Lily deserved no less. 1 month later, just after the new year, Tracy Ellison called Jonathan with astonishing news. I tracked Margaret Hewitt's paper trail. She lived in Street Paul until 1935, then moved to Duluth. One of her neighbors from the 1950s is still alive, a 90-year-old woman named Helen Donovan. I interviewed Miss Donovan, and she recalls that Margaret raised a girl named Beatrice, but never officially adopted her. The girl left at age 14 to work as a domestic helper in Minneapolis. Miss Donovan believes Beatrice took the surname Dawson after marrying a traveling salesman in her late teens. Jonathan's pulse raced. So, if that's correct, she may have living children or grandchildren. Exactly, Tracy replied. I'm following leads on a Beatrice Dawson who married an Edward Dawson in 1944. They had at least one child, a girl named Rose Dawson, born around 1946. The family eventually moved out of state. Emotions surged through Jonathan. Lily's granddaughter could be out there. Keep going, Tracy, he urged. We're so close. It took another few weeks, but Tracy tracked down Rose Dawson, now Rose Dawson Bennett, living in a retirement community in Iowa. She was 79 years old. When Jonathan learned the news, his hands shook with excitement. He asked Tracy to reach out carefully, to explain the situation that a man renovating her grandmother's ancestral home wished to speak with her about her family heritage. A week passed with no reply. Then, one snowy afternoon, Jonathan's phone rang. He recognized Tracy's number. Rose Dawson Bennett agreed to meet you, Tracy said, voice quivering with emotion. She's never heard much about her grandmother, only scraps of stories from her mother, Beatrice, who died young. Rose wants to come to Redwood Falls and see Willow Ridge House. Jonathan closed his eyes, relief flooding him. Set it up. I'll welcome her whenever she wants to come. Rose Dawson Bennett arrived in Redwood Falls by bus, accompanied by her adult son, Stephen Bennett, who had arranged a caretaker for her. She was frail, using a cane to support her steps, but her hazel eyes sparkled with curiosity and an undercurrent of sorrow. Jonathan greeted them outside Willow Ridge House, the winter wind nipping at their cheeks. Miss S. Dawson Bennett, Jonathan said, offering his arm to help her navigate the uneven ground. Thank you for making the trip, she smiled warmly. Please, call me Rose, I'm honored. You invited me. My mother rarely spoke of her childhood, but I always sensed there was a mystery. They stepped inside, Jonathan leading Rose through the newly restored foyer. The floors gleamed, and the walls displayed old photographs of Redwood Falls that Dr. Barnes had collected. At one point, Rose's breath caught. She reached out to steady herself on a doorframe. I feel as though I've been here before, she whispered, tears glistening. Like my mother's memories are echoing inside me. Gently, Jonathan guided her to the library where Dr. Barnes had set up a small exhibit of Kensington artifacts. On display were the letters, photographs, the signet ring, and the music box. Rose's gaze landed on the music box, and she approached it with trembling hands. My mother had a melody she used to hum when I was small, Rose murmured. I never knew where she learned it. Jonathan wound the box, gently, letting the lullaby drift through the silent room. Tears slipped down Rose's cheeks. This was the tune, she said, voice shaking. My mother would hum it on nights when she missed. Well, I never knew, probably her own mother. Jonathan felt tears burning his own eyes. In that moment, the decades of separation and sorrow seemed to converge, forging a bridge between Lily Kensington and her descendants. Over the next days, Jonathan helped Rose examine the documents Dr. Barnes had painstakingly translated and organized. Photographs of Lily as a young woman, letters from Michael Farnsworth, diaries referencing my dearest daughter, and even the signet ring. Rose listened in quiet awe, learning of the tragedy that had befallen her grandmother. All my life, I wondered why Mother was so sad, Rose confided. She told me she grew up in a strict household, raised by a woman who wasn't her real mother. She never knew her father, never spoke of him. She ran away at 14 to find work in Minneapolis. It was there she met my father, but she always had nightmares. A hush fell as Rose realized the magnitude of her inheritance. If my grandmother was Lily Kensington, does that mean this house belongs to me? Jonathan nodded slowly. Legally, there might be a claim, but you should do what feels right for you and your family. I'm willing to share this place. Perhaps we can co-own it or set up a foundation. I've poured so much into restoring it, but at heart, it's your family's legacy. Stephen, Rose's son, placed a hand on his mother's shoulder. Mom, you're not in any shape to maintain an estate. And we're not wealthy people. Rose's gaze traveled across the ornate moldings and the newly polished banisters. I don't want to disrupt what you've done, Jonathan. My mother never desired wealth. She only wanted to be free from pain. If Willow Ridge House can bring people joy now, that's enough for me. But I'd like to see it become something meaningful. Maybe a place where no one has to live in fear. In that instant, Jonathan felt a surge of relief and determination. What if we transform Willow Ridge House into a historical and community center honoring Lily, preserving the story, and opening it for educational tours or events? We could also host programs for at-risk women, perhaps, a way to offer help and solace, the kind Lily never received. Tears slipped down Rose's cheeks again. That would be more than I could have dreamed. When news broke that Jonathan had located Lily Kensington's descendants, Redwood Falls was abuzz. Christopher Mills tried to manipulate the situation, suggesting that Rose Dawson Bennett should sue Jonathan for full ownership. But Rose, with unwavering grace, dismissed Mills's overtures. She publicly endorsed Jonathan's plan to create the Kensington Legacy Center at Willow Ridge House, an initiative that would combine historical preservation with community support programs. Mayor Lucy Hamilton threw her support behind the plan, announcing that the city would grant the new foundation tax-exempt status and help sponsor educational workshops. Public opinion swiftly turned against Mills, who retreated, licking his wounds. Behind the scenes, James Winston finalized a legal agreement between Jonathan and Rose. It recognized Rose as the legitimate heir of the Kensington line, granted her partial ownership of the property, and established the Kensington Legacy Foundation. Jonathan pledged a large sum to fund renovations and initial programs, while Rose offered her blessing and story, lending authenticity and heart to the project. Spring arrived, bringing blossoms to the estate. Willow Ridge House had shed its haunted gloom, now shining with fresh paint, restored antiques, and newly landscaped gardens. The day of the grand opening drew a sizable crowd, townspeople curious about the mansion's rebirth, historians eager to learn more, and philanthropic supporters of Jonathan's vision. Rose sat in a place of honor, next to Jonathan, as the mayor stepped forward to cut the ribbon. Cameras clicked, and local journalists scribbled notes. The atmosphere buzzed with hope and reverence for the past. Jonathan took the podium, clearing his throat. Thank you, everyone, for being here. When I first stepped through the gates of Willow Ridge House, I believed I was simply purchasing a piece of real estate. But this old mansion has taught me lessons I never expected to learn about family, about compassion, about hidden truths that span generations. Today, we dedicate the Kensington Legacy Center not just to Lily, who suffered so much within these walls, but to all those who've endured hardship in silence. May this place be a beacon of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest corners, light can shine once again. Rose dabbed her eyes, and applause filled the front lawn. The music box lullaby played softly over the speaker system, an homage to Lily's memory echoing across time. In the months that followed, Jonathan felt a profound transformation. His earlier motivations, wealth, prestige, collecting properties like trophies, faded in importance. He discovered a deeper calling in philanthropy and community engagement. He spent more and more time at Willow Ridge, giving tours, overseeing charity galas, and supporting the foundation's programs. The sorrowful presence he once sensed in the attic seemed to dissipate, replaced by an air of peaceful resolution. Rose visited frequently too, sometimes accompanied by her grandchildren. She treated the mansion like a treasured family heirloom, yet never once showed greed or resentment toward Jonathan. In her gentle way, she became a grandmotherly figure to him, asking questions about his life, offering wisdom gleaned from her own hardships. One sunny afternoon, they shared tea in the refurbished drawing room. "You seem happier these days," Rose observed. Jonathan nodded, a contented smile tugging at his lips. "I never knew how empty my life felt until I connected with Willow Ridge and with you. Money can't buy what we have now. It's belonging, purpose." Rose reached over and patted his hand. "Your parents would be proud, Jonathan. You've given Lily and Beatrice a voice. You've brought our family story out of the shadows." He swallowed hard, emotion rising. He thought of that night in the attic, the whisper that said, "Help her." He felt he had, at last, honored that plea. The final piece of the puzzle arrived unexpectedly in an old storage unit in Duluth. Tracy Ellison uncovered Charles Gilbert's estate records from the 1960s. Among them was a letter acknowledging that he had relinquished guardianship of Beatrice Gilbert to Margaret Hewitt in 1932. The records confirmed that Lily's mother, Beatrice, had never been legally disinherited. Charles simply vanished from her life. It was a small but significant vindication for Lily's memory, and proved that the rightful heir was indeed Lily's bloodline. Christopher Mills, outmaneuvered legally and shunned socially, sold several properties in Redwood Falls and moved on to other ventures. Jonathan didn't celebrate Mills's downfall, he only felt relief that Willow Ridge House was safe from corporate exploitation. Summer's warmth embraced Redwood Falls. The refurbished gardens around Willow Ridge House blossomed in bright petals. Guests from neighboring towns and states arrived to witness the mansion's rebirth, strolling among historic exhibits, reading Lily's letters, and contemplating the tragic romance that once filled these halls. Local women's organizations held workshops, turning the old manor into a place of new beginnings. Jonathan often reflected on the improbable chain of events, stumbling upon Lily's trunk, the hidden chamber, the diaries, the ghostly sobs, and the final discovery of Rose. Each step had guided him toward a purpose beyond wealth, to heal a wound that had lingered through the generations, and, in doing so, to heal part of himself. On a warm June evening, Jonathan stood on the mansion's second-floor balcony, overlooking the twilight. Fireflies danced over the neatly trimmed hedges. Somewhere below, laughter rose from a small gathering of volunteers finishing a day's work. He breathed in the sweet air, a sense of calm enveloping him. Turning back inside, he thought he caught a fleeting glimpse, a delicate figure in a vintage dress, hair pinned back, her face etched with gentle sadness. She stood near the hallway, gazing at him as if to say, "Thank you." He blinked, and she vanished, leaving only the faintest hint of peace behind. For a moment, Jonathan's chest ached with both sorrow and joy. "You're welcome," he whispered to the silent corridor, placing a hand against the wall. In that quiet instant, the house felt vibrantly alive. The ghosts of the past were finally at rest. Thank you for journeying through the halls of Willow Ridge House and witnessing Jonathan Carter's extraordinary discovery, one that shattered his old priorities and opened his heart to a deeper mission. If this story moved you, please show your support by liking the video, subscribing to the channel for more captivating tales, and sharing it with friends who love uplifting drama and hidden history stories. Your engagement helps our community grow, allowing us to explore more life-changing narratives together. By doing so, you stand with us in honoring the legacy of those who came before, their struggles, their hopes, and the improbable connections that unite us across time. So click like, hit subscribe, and spread the word. Let's keep these stories alive, reminding everyone that even in the darkest chapters of our past, there is always room for light, redemption, and a new beginning.